Welcome to Visibility Unlimited. I'm Leslie Short, your host and owner of the Cavu Group. We work with companies and organizations to expand beyond their current culture. Visibility Unlimited discusses topics focusing on diversity, inclusion, leadership, culture, and current events. Look out for my book, Expand Beyond Your Current Culture, out January 2021. Enjoy this episode and remember to subscribe to stay updated on future podcasts. Join us for a discussion on healthcare, office policy and procedure, diversity and inclusion trainings. It's not about politics, or is it?
And thank you everyone for joining us today for webinar 23 entitled, It's Not About Politics. The discussion that we're going to be having today is going to be on healthcare, office policy and procedures, diversity and inclusion training, all those hot button topics that have been in the news as of recently. And some of the questions that we wanted you to think about this week was, does your company share their political thoughts? And can you share yours? What new company policies have been put in place due to the election, Black Lives Matter, and social justice marches? And yeah, we're looking forward to a lively discussion. As always, my name is Micah. I head up a group called the Village Collective. We are a conglomerate of Black, Brown, immigrant, first generation startup founders in the New York tri-state area. So again, on behalf of the Village Collective, I welcome you all here. And with that being said, I will hand it over to Leslie.
So hi, I'm Leslie Short. I'm the owner of the Cavu Group and the host of Visibility Unlimited, which is the podcast that we take from the webinars and turn them into podcasts. So if you have friends that are like, darn it, I missed it, send them to the podcast to listen. So started this topic, start thinking about it because there was so much rumbling going on about whether you could go to work wearing your Black Lives Matter button or a Trump mask or anything that was political. And companies kept flip-flopping. Yes, we wrote a statement. Yes, we invited everyone. But all of a sudden, you couldn't wear the paraphernalia to work. Okay? But then we know that politics has always been part of business. But it used to be very quiet because you would have very wealthy people give money, donate, viewer leadership. Maybe you got invited to certain galas. But then all of a sudden now, CEOs have started to impose and kind of demand that you're part of their political thinking. So there was the article that was written, the company was Coincide, I think it was, where the CEO said, I don't care, this is my vision, this is my mission, I don't care what you think about either side, I don't want to hear anything in the office, you're not allowed to wear anything, come to work and be focused on my vision and my mission for this company. End of conversation. Then you had other CEOs that were like, this is who I am, this is my beliefs, and if you don't believe who I believe in, then get out. There was an article this week that said the whole plant is going to close unless you all vote for Trump. Like, you're not going to have a job. I've given him tons and tons of money and the RNC tons and tons of money. And if you don't vote that way, we're going to have to shut down and you can't work. Now, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I, one, don't want to be told who I'm supposed to vote for. Two, the old adage of no politics and religion in the office. We know that has gone. So how much is politics really playing a part in our lives? From where it used to be, you had your affiliation and you went out and voted and you spoke among your friends. We're also going to have a special guest that's going to pop in later. He's actually dealing with a politician as we speak, who is a lobbyist. That can also share how some of that part of things work. But I wanted to share some of the other things that were going on. Healthcare. If you have health care through your office, does it depend on what political association they're in or how much you get or you don't get? Trump also saying diversity and inclusion trainings must stop or money will not be put into those companies. And these are companies that can be from museums. It is companies that may get federal funds. All of a sudden, that's not allowed. So now politics is in the trainings for which are allowed to happen. Then this article came out today, brands jumping into voting conversations, but consumers say efforts don't affect buying decisions. So you have Starbucks is giving workers time off the vote. You have Chipotle going, chai chai vote lay on a t-shirt for you to buy. You have Amazon, Uber, Nike, Postmates, all remind customers about voter registration. You have Foot Locker that has now turned their stores into voter registrations, as well as sporting arenas have also turned into. Then there's a nonpartisan coalition, Time to Vote, counts Patagonia, PayPal, and Levi Strauss among its founding members. 700 different companies have signed up to push people to vote. So on one hand, we all go, yay, get the word out to vote. On the other hand, when does it cross the line when your employees start saying, this is who you need to vote for, or you need to walk out the door? So you know how we work here. There's no need to wait for question and answer. This is a conversation. I'm sure people have stories that they may or may not want to share. Well, I hope you want to share. So jump in, questions, thoughts. I mean, this was a 4-page article that came out today. One of the things that when it comes to brands being involved with voter efforts, 46% said that it leads them to view a brand more favorably. 32% said it has no impact. 11% said they have no opinion, and 12% said it makes them view the brand less favorable. So some brands are jumping in going, I want to be part of this. Why? Because it's the hot thing of the moment. Voting. It's a hot thing of a moment because it really does change our lives. I think years ago, of course, whether you had a Republican or Democratic Party weighed on which way certain bills were being written, things were happening. But now, politics, I think, affects every ounce of our lives. Do you feel that it's always been that way? Or it's become so polarizing that there was so much behind the scenes that were happening before that we didn't know as consumers or as employees, where now it's just, Hobby Lobby, believe what I believe or don't, we've spoken about that before.
I'll start it off with the healthcare piece as well. Yeah. And just give some background. So when I was in corporate America, I actually sold health benefits to small, medium-sized businesses everywhere between, one employee company up to a couple of thousand employees. And just thinking back on some of the conversations I had with some of these CEOs and how their decision-making process on what benefits to offer, at what amount to subsidize each employee for the benefits that they choose and how they pick and everything. And I can say, and just again, from my experience in the companies that I worked with as well, one of the first backlashes that we saw when it came to that was when Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act came about, where you saw like these employers that were not too happy now that they had to pay for benefits to us up to a certain amount for employees. And I can see how that would affect, kind of influencing their employees' political beliefs, being in part because if government's now saying that I have to spend X amount of dollars and then I have to provide these benefits to my employees. And sometimes it comes down to the bottom line where it's cutting into my profits and my operating budget on what I can offer them. So I'm not speaking either way on the subject, but I'm just saying I can see how employers will say, hey, please go this way, or you should go this way if you want to keep a job, basically. Not saying it's right,
But
but
really? So,
I
okay,
mean,
so because we get into it. So, okay, let's
mhm.
think about this for a second.
And
I get the bottom line part,
mhm.
but that used to be done on the executive level, 19th floor, very behind the doors. You come knock on my desk or my door and tell me you should be swayed this way because next week I may take your health care away if you don't vote the way I vote. That's the least of my worries. I'm not even going to have a job because you have officially crossed the line.
And
There's, go ahead.
yeah, and I'm not going to say it again. I'm not saying it's right, but what I'm saying is that having the conversation with some of these employers, these CEOs, and I'll just use for example, you got a 40-man company, you've been around for say 20, 25 years, and you don't know how to operate your business in a profitable way. Let's just put it plain out there. And now you're running on thin margins and everything else of the sort. Then I mean, not so many ways. Like, hey, if you don't vote this way to keep these tax breaks that I'm getting, or you don't vote this way to, to give these advantages to my company, then yes, you may be out of a job come 90 days from now, being in part because looking at my books and the back end, I just can't afford to keep you in this way. So maybe there could be a better way to say it. But I mean, for a lot of these and for a lot of these companies, these small, medium-sized businesses, which make up most of the businesses across America, these are hard decisions that they have to make. And I think there could be a better way to deliver it to say, hey, or get a better CFO in there to kind of take a look at the numbers and see how you can better operate. But it is life and death for a lot of these small, medium-sized businesses.
I get that. But those decisions were made behind closed doors. You weren't knocking on somebody, you weren't going to your employees and saying you don't have an option. Like, regardless of if you had to scrape two pennies behind, and maybe I'm still old school. And I know the young people go transparency and I go visibility. We will never know what someone's books really says. Ever. I don't.
I do, but
Well, no, you really don't. Because even as someone that was a business owner in Japan, when I made the deal knowing there was going to be the books that they showed me and the books that the Japanese kept. And as all I could do is know that what I really saw coming in the door matched the books that they showed me. I knew doggone well there was another set of books because there was other stuff going out the back door.
yeah.
And so we never honestly know. Even sometimes the CFO doesn't always know. I'm just going to leave that there. I'm not saying anything that worked for anybody. I'm just going to leave that right there. There are different ways to maneuver. But that's an accountant issue. That's not a moral issue where a CEO or a brand now tells me which way to go for a right that people have marched for, killed for, died for. That is the right of every individual to decide which way they're going to go. And the fact that it's become part of, and here's where I go back, is politics now the black box of racial injustice? Is that what politics is now? Perfect timing, Dwayne. So I'm going to just stop myself for a second and introduce a special guest that we have tonight, who really can break all this political all up in our business from brands and business standpoint. Dwayne Andrews is an attorney as well as, should I say lobbyist? Because you don't really.
You should. I have no problem with being a lobbyist. That's
he
what
is
I
also
do.
a lobbyist. If you're not sure, the largest 3 lobbying companies in the United States to date: AARP, NRA, and APAC are the three largest. And then there are paid lobbyists that work for companies to do what? Dwayne, take it away. What exactly does a lobbyist do?
Well, in the kindest sense of the word, we get a chance to explain the point of views of our clients to people that usually and generally try to be generalists. And when I say these people, I'm talking about elected officials and people who make decisions, right? Like, so if you have somebody who is an elected official and, there's a whole gamut of information that they have to absorb at times. And so, a lot of times there's legislation or there's regulations that get proposed that are well-intentioned, but have consequences that people haven't thought out because they're not in that business. And so, go ahead. I see you ready to say something.
Yeah, because, we were speaking about brands and CEOs and crossing the line, telling employees which way they should vote.
Yeah, I mean, that's a no-no, right?
It should be.
It should be. It should be a no-no. I mean, I think everybody should vote their conscience, and whatever that is, that is. It's one of the reasons why we value having the ballot box be a secretive process, because you go in, you vote, and that vote is between you and whomever else you want to tell it to.
But if you're lobbying, and anyone can jump in and ask anything about this, if you're lobbying for a company, okay, and I know you work a lot with politicians, but I know you do companies as well. If you're lobbying for a company and this company is pushing a bill that benefits them for whatever dollar amount or whatever they're looking for, at what point do they come back to their employees and say, we would prefer when you go to the ballot box, just letting you know your job may or may not depend on this being passed? Right.
I mean, there are, as with everything in life, right? Like, there are ways to deliver messages without being just so blunt about it, right? I mean, it could even be just a company email, a company newsletter that says, hey, here are the platforms of these two candidates. Boom, boom. And you should trust your employees enough to figure it out on their own, right? Like, you don't have to say, well, if you vote for this and if Trump gets reelected, then we're going to be straight. But if Biden comes in, then we may have an issue.
But you saw the article that I posted. Mm-hmm. That was that company that said, you vote for this or you don't have a job, we're shutting down. So there's just that, and anyone can jump in. It's just that fine line that I don't even want, and this is a personal bias, I don't want information on either candidate when I show up to work. That is right. Not what I'm there for. Unless I'm working in politics. Go ahead, Ken.
So I think that it's always been when I worked at the bank, put it that way, we knew that it was pretty most of the financial institutions were Republican. I think it was not so much in your face, but they did support Reaganomics. Now, that was not my platform. So that we knew. I think this is a little bit different because now with social media, everything is in your face. And like you're saying, Leslie, with these companies, and I understand what you're saying too, Micah, about if it's a small company and the healthcare, they're going to say, we can't afford this because we can't give everybody healthcare. That means somebody's going to get cut back, somebody's going to get laid off. But I think the other thing is, if they are giving people the day off, the question I would have for as an employee, if they're giving you the day off to vote, what are they taking back? Because if we're looking at some of these lines where it's 8 hours, you expect me to come to work tomorrow and then you may be taking like a day that I need. Are you going to take a personal day? And then all of a sudden later on, the company policy is, well, now we only have 5 sick days rather than 6 days because we actually gave you guys the day off to vote. I think the other thing is that people are more aware now and there may be some pushback. And I'll give you the example about SoulCycle and Equinox. When people found out that the owner of Related, through that campaign, I think it was like a fundraiser for Trump,
yep.
People started canceling their Equinox and SoulCycle, memberships like 1, 2, 3. They lost a lot of money behind that. So he actually had to come out and apologize and say, they're separate companies. It has nothing to do with that. So there's, I think, ramifications because people are sophisticated. I think the mistake that these companies make and the government makes, they think the American people are stupid. We are not. I mean, you know, there might be some of us that may be lagging a little back in some of the things that we know. We may not be as sophisticated as everybody, Dwayne, with the lobbyists. Now, personally, I don't really like lobbyists. I don't know you, but I didn't like them because I worked in construction risk management for a long time. And one of the things that the lobbyists did, speaking of influence, they had a real influence on the scaffold law, which means that it's strict liability with these guys falling on objects. And they kept that law on the books since 1803.
So in full disclosure, my firm does represent the Trial Lawyers Association, and I can say that I am partially responsible for your dislike of the scaffold law. That being said, you know, everybody needs a good lobbyist. And going back to your point, though, about the government thinking that people are stupid, I don't necessarily think they're stupid. They think that you just don't have, the average American just doesn't have the time to pour over all of the stuff that's happening, right? Like, and so that's one of the reasons, you know, one of the reasons why things fall through the cracks. And then, you know, your other point about Related and Equinox, I think a lot of people, if you sat down and looked at the campaign disclosure reports for a lot of different people, you would see that you probably wouldn't have a lot of places where you would end up being able to shop or patronize or what have you, because of the finances. I mean, if you think about it, one of the biggest supporters of the Democratic Party in the 2000s was a man who's now president, right? And, you know, he spent a lot of money cozying up to Democrats. And, you know, so, you know, you just leave that for, you know, no comment there. But, you know, it's the game, unfortunately.
Well, look at what happened. So who else has jumped in the game that normally would not is the Nature and Science and Medical Journal. Actually, you wouldn't always think they would jump into politics out front of it. Let's put it that way. Well, they pulled together and had people sign that if this does not change the president, that we can forget all about climate change and nature and science moving forward and how it was going to impact their industry. So I think this go around, there are industries that have never stepped out front of the political game and really putting a stake in, we're going to lose it all, or we have the opportunity or a chance to lose it all if you do not vote. Now, they actually said, you can't vote for Trump. You should not be voting for Trump if you want to stay in this profession. And I see Dr. Allen said that she works for a government agency. They can't bring political or paraphernalia on the job. Well, that's what happened with that other company. He was like, I don't want to see anything. But did you also see the police officer that showed up to vote in full uniform with a Trump mask on? Now, he is suspended, but I'm just like, you have a right to vote whatever you feel is right for you. Hands down. You know, I'm a believer in do you, unless you cross over into my lane on my person, and then that's where I have an issue. But common sense, we know is not common, but to show up at the polls in your uniform, that's where, with the Trump mask on, or whether it's a Biden mask, if you're in your uniform, that's where we have crossed the line where politics is just, it went from half the people don't understand it to still half the people don't understand it, that herd mentality, to the group that is getting it and understands how it's affected them in their daily life and in their decision making or their CEO decision making for work, to we can just wild out and just use it as an excuse to do whatever we want to do. That's where I also have an issue where we're going with politics today. Or is it politics? Remember I said, is it politics or is it not?
Right. So just allow me to jump in for 1 second. So, you mentioned the scientists and what have you. I think that over time, people realize that politics and policy affect a lot more of their lives than they thought they did, right? And you can no longer in this era, like Kim said, not pay attention to things because of social media, because of all of the things that happen that bring this information to the forefront. But I'm glad these scientists finally woke up and realized that policy affects their work. It's kind of the same thing in the 1980s and 90s. The tech industry did not want to pay attention to policy and politics because they said, no, we're just going to do these things. And, we don't care about what the government does until the government started regulating them to the point where they felt uncomfortable. And now the tech industry is one of the most powerful lobbying industries in the country. And, so I think that as people go forward, they have to realize, and this is my personal opinion, you have to realize that government is already in every aspect of your life. You pay taxes, even Donald Trump pays sales tax, right? Like, so everybody pays taxes in some form or shape. And so, a lot of decisions, whether it's how we communicate via Zoom or walk down the street, there are all these things that are decided upon by elected officials and the people that they appoint. And so politics is in our life, regardless if we like it or not.
So do I get to hire you? I can't afford you, but so do you, friend, a family and friend discount? Because, or am I going to really turn into a real lobbyist to have to go and fight for diversity and inclusion trainings? Like, that's just crazy to me what's happening now and what's being said about them. I'm sure that most the people that are making that particular statement has probably never done any of the trainings. On top of that, to all of a sudden just take it away from the governmental part of it, which has influenced some of corporate America. The emails, do you use these words? White fragility? Yes, because someone sent me an article saying this, that, and the other. And I'm like, I say privilege, but I also say I'm a Black privileged person. When did privilege become triggering? When is that now against the law to speak about privilege? Oh, when it comes to color. So is that where we're going, where every industry is going to need a lobbyist? I know you're going to be happy about that, but is that where we're going?
Every industry has a lobbyist already, but I say that facetiously. I think that there's more of an awareness now as to kind of how people lobby and what they do because of social media, because of disclosure. I mean, we file reports all the time that outline who we work for, what we get paid, and who we contact on behalf of our clients. But I also think that if you just go back, there's always been some form of lobbying, right? Like, whether it's the old boys network where somebody just sits there and says, this would be great if this patch of land could turn into forget about it being a park and it becomes an office building. And so, so I think that continues to happen. And I saw in the chat, you're absolutely, I didn't see who wrote that. You're absolutely right. Things are supposed to be done on a nonpartisan basis. Absolutely. But do people have biases? And when you elect them, do they have a bias towards one thing or the other? And, and then they surround themselves, because just remember, somebody gets elected, they select the head of the agency who probably has some biases towards them. And then those people, for the most part, when they appoint the political folks, not the people who are there, who are part of the organization forever and who have the real knowledge in an organization, but the political appointees, they're all going to have similar leanings. Right. And there are going to be those implicit and explicit biases in in those folks and how they run the agency regardless.
No, that's very true. I mean, there's biases in everything that we do. And, I guess again, I get all of that, and I'm not good with it, but it's just the reality of what it is. Like you said, I think it's when we come and step across the line and expect an individual to toe the line at work, is exactly what we're not supposed to do, is exactly what's happening. And then that's great for those that have the, air quoting now, herd mentality and will just follow. But like with anything, what happens when you stand and say, I'm not for that, or do you have to just sit and be quiet? Because at the end of the day, like you said, right, when we go to cast that ballot, that's private. Do we really know what's happening? How many Republicans may or may not show up and hit I hit the wrong lever. Oopsie, Biden, let's go. Like, you see it happening now. People are starting to separate from party lines. So it's just an interesting, what I started seeing in the news. Like, it was just like, all of a sudden it was a click. And now all these articles coming out and CEOs having something to say. And like Kim said, giving you the day off, but are they taking something away? They're going to give it back? Who knows? But it's part of their social justice outreach. So that's why, as you were coming in, I said, is this now the new black box?
So a couple of things. I think number one, right, going back to what Kim said, and I don't know, Kim, if you're based in New York State, but, it's or New York City. We have, as an employer, we have to give 4 hours off to allow you to vote, or to allow you to come in 4 hours late, or leave 4 hours early, or take 4 hours during the day to go and vote on election day. That being said, we're talking about corporations. Let me be honest, right? Like, corporations do what they do because they are ultimately worried about their bottom line and trying to affect their bottom line. When you talk about these elections, right? Corporations got fat over these past 4 years with the tax cuts and with everything else that's going on. So, are there a lot of corporate execs that are worried right now that the twin whammies of a tax cut that's probably not going to get renewed, and the fact that we're in a budget slowdown and an economic slowdown, are they worried about that kind of stuff? Yeah. But again, it goes back to your original point, is, do you have to sit here and bludgeon your employees and say, well, if you don't vote, if Trump doesn't get reelected, we're probably going to have layoffs, which in a lot of cases is BS, right? Like, a lot of these businesses will be just fine, right? Joe Biden, if he gets elected, it's not in his best interest to see corporate America disappear, right? You have to have an economy to do all the things that any president would want to have happen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's so, where do people get their information? The 50% that gets it, the 80% that doesn't, and then the social media where you follow. But if you have someone like, and nothing against the factory workers, but to have your boss send out a memo to say, vote this way, or we have to shut down. If you're already fighting to save your family and your being, what is that? And there's no regulations on that, because again, I hate the word unprecedented, but this is 2020 has taken us somewhere, that we haven't been before, and people can push the line, the envelope, because what are you going to do? If you have a job, regardless of what it is, you're kind of sucking it up right now to get to the next one, or to hold on to what you have. So what are we going to do? I mean, our next webinar will be the day after the election. I can't wait to have that conversation, because that is what we're going to do. We may not know where we're going at that point.
Well, I agree with you. They've already pushed the line because even when you, some of the meat packing factories like Smithfield, they had already told their employees like they were a benefactor of the Defense Act. Like they were allowed to stay open. That already is politicized because the president did that, and when other things he wouldn't do it in order to produce the PPE, but they did it. They enacted the Defense Act, and I don't know the whole name, in order to have the meatpacking facilities stay open, and people had COVID and they were coming to work. And the employers were telling these people, oh, if you just work, we're going to give you $500. But people are like dropping like flies because there is no space. There is no way that you could do 6 feet. So they've already politicized, as you're saying, Dwayne and Leslie, they've already politicized almost every part of our life. And like you, Micah, the healthcare, everything is politicized. It unfortunately has gone that way.
But going back to it, where do we go from here? How do you peel this back at this point in time to say, okay, let's revert back to the old ways? And I'm just playing devil's advocate here. For one, I don't, as you know, Leslie, I don't like anybody telling me what to do. So, but at the same time, I mean, going back to some of these companies that got these contracts during COVID, and knowing that if COVID is, a vaccine is made there, and we go back to old ways, there will be people out of work, or have to be retrained. And I think what needs to happen, where I feel our government kind of fails at, is that build the infrastructure around that to have people be sustainable, or have industries to be sustainable, not just now, but for future. So for example, when we're talking about the factory workers, and, for a fact, the first couple of years of, I guess Trump's platform, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but Trump's platform when he was running in 2016 was saying that, hey, we're gonna make sure you keep these jobs, these factories worker, for all these factory workers, and then they all shut down now because he shipped out their jobs other places. But where do we build the infrastructure at to sustain our economy and get those people, make sure those people can be retrained to be, to be prepared for whatever's coming next? Like, for example, with the fracking and everything, that Biden did say that he would reduce no new fracking facilities or whatever. Okay, if we built an industry on this, what are we going to do to retrain those people that were currently doing that are now not going to be able to get a job from it? And that's my problem with, if the government's going to be in all parts of our life, then support us, build infrastructure for us. Don't pacify us with social programs that's going to have us dependent upon you, generation after generation, but actually build industry so we could actually, be self-sufficient.
I mean, where are those people now? You have to think about where some of them are. They alive? I hate to say it like that, but COVID has taken so many rural areas down, has taken cities down. How do we all survive for this? How do the Black and brown communities be trained to go back and work in anywhere, factories, things like that? It's all been closed. So yeah, where is the infrastructure to move forward? That we do not know. Unless I know you can't tell the secrets, but unless there's some secret, something that's hopefully I'm like hoping somebody's planning something in the back. How are we going to move this? Because this is going to be a hard shift.
Yeah, I mean, so you have to think about it from an elected official, from a policy standpoint, right? House of Representatives reelected every 2 years. United States Senate every 6 years, the president every 4 years, mayor 4 years, and what have you. So every time we think about what long-term planning is, these folks are literally trying to get from election to election. And so a lot of times there's not the long-term planning, or there is the long-term plan and Mayor de Blasio's out of office, time for the new mayor to come in, and they're going to just change up the whole thing and change kind of the whole approach. And we see this particularly in education all the time, right? Like, you have somebody, and it's something that I think everybody can relate to. You have a mayor who comes in and says, you're going to learn this way, and it's going to be phonics, and then it's not phonics, it's whole language, and then it's not whole language, it's something else. And so the long-term planning doesn't exist because there are no long-term kind of investors in there. Corporations, whole different story, right? We've got corporations that are run by the same family for hundreds of years, and so they have that, both the leadership and the long-term planning that goes along with it, and government just fails to do that. And I believe it's just because of the structure and inherent nature of elected politics.
And so that goes back to you, Micah, going, yeah, no one's looking at infrastructure because they don't have infrastructure. They have race to race. So if it's not a popular thing to do, or how you're going to raise money, then why would you invest in it? You may speak about it as a platform issue, but that's not the focus. And I think, so there was a time that I wanted to run for office, that some of you know. And I remember speaking with Dwayne, and I'm like, I want to do this and this. And he was like, no. I was like, no, but. And he was like, no. I was like, no, but. No. And he was like, no. That none of that's a great fantasy. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm, by the way, everybody, I'm not a dream killer. I've just, Leslie's a friend, and I just believe her talents were better used elsewhere, as we all can see right now. But again, and it's not just so much, Leslie, you talk about fundraising. It's not even as much fundraising, because there are a lot of people out there that get reelected without raising, boatloads of money. But it's about getting reelected, right? And so, you need to focus on things. There are things that a lot of elected officials do that are worthwhile, and you never hear about them because that's not what drives press. That's not what drives social media. That's not what drives a whole bunch of things. And there are some elected officials who get elected for doing absolutely nothing, but they talk a good game, and their social media game's hot, and they get press and whatever. And if you kind of look at their legislative achievements, or even, the achievements of bringing money into their districts, it's not there, but they talk a really good game, and they're with the people.
So I don't know if anyone had a chance to listen to Obama. He was on right before the webinar started, and he was stating that you can't just vote for president and the vice president. You have to vote, you have to look down the entire ticket. That all local elections matter just as much as the national presidency, because that's what affects you sometimes first.
This is like my pet peeve, right? Like, because everybody's going to vote now, right? Like, they're going to vote now. And then in 2021, for those of you who live in New York City, you're going to have the mayor's race, all of the city council, all of the borough presidents. There's going to be a plethora of races, and we're going to get probably a quarter to a fifth of the turnout. And those are the things that affect you, a lot more. I've had arguments with people in panels and say, I personally believe that the state and city elections are more important than the presidential elections, because even as much as a dumpster fire, and this is my personal opinion, as Donald Trump has been as a president, most of his policies and most of the things that he said haven't come into play into policies that affect us as New Yorkers, aside from his COVID-19 response. We'll set that aside. But most of the things that on a day-to-day basis, those decisions, from everything from your roads to the airports to the taxes that we pay, all of that stuff is controlled by Albany and City Hall. And people need to pay attention more to that than worrying about Trump, Biden. That's important. But if you don't come out and vote in 2021, and when you have a municipal election, Bill de Blasio, during his first term, he got elected by, a pitiful amount of votes. I can't remember what it was. It's like, come on, this is New York City. We're a city of 8 million people. And, the winner of the primary is getting 700, 800,000 votes. That's ridiculous.
I think, again, most people up until the last and I shouldn't say most people, I shouldn't speak about people, but I'm going to say I think a majority of people really didn't pay attention to politics of how the city works, how the state works. This is something you were interested in, or, you know, and then all of a sudden with Obama, I think people start paying attention, and for better or for worse, Trump, I think, made people go, wait, what the devil is this? How does this actually work? Because something ain't right here. So, you know, as much as we may not agree, be on the same platform, let's say, here's what I think Trump has been able to do. Point out racial injustice, social injustice, understand how politics works, have people watching the news until we've gotten overwhelmed with it now. And so there's a new education, because I think people that said, this is now crossing into my job, this is now crossing into my profession, this is now crossing into my life. What is going on? I need to be a bit more educated on what's happening. So on some weird universe that we're in 2020, there has been, for me personally, that bright light of people having these discussions on how politics actually works, not Democrat and Republican, because it's bigger than that. How does this work? How does this affect me? How does it move me? What should I be looking for? I should be reading more. And so I applaud that. I applaud that social justice is up front. I applaud that racial justice is up front. I applaud that politics is up front. What I don't applaud is how polarizing it has become. And whatever year have you never seen another president of that same party come out and help someone get reelected? Like, this is something, yes, unprecedented, but this is something that has torn a nation apart. And I'm not sure people even really know why it's even being torn apart.
I'll add to that as well. Sorry. I'll add to that as well, too. I mean, I agree that, you know, what Trump brought about was this collective reckoning for a lot of people as well. I know the collective of people usually didn't vote down ballot, as Dwayne was saying, didn't even take a look at some of those initiatives there. And I think one of the things, at least in the last, you know, local elections that happened, was people now looking at who their state prosecutor is, who their district attorney is, who all these people that truly affect our everyday life. Whereas before, you're kind of looking at it as, okay, are the appellate judges that are there, the Supreme Court judges that are there at your local, making the decisions to say whether this person's going to get prosecuted, whether this person's going to get, you know, 10, 20 to life, you know, and things like that. So I that's one thing I will, you know, I wouldn't say give him a pat on the back, but what he did was make people literally take a second look and do the research and think about like how this affects me in my everyday life as well. And just to add to that as well, to what you were saying, Dwayne and Leslie, like that's where we actually build the long-term infrastructure, is putting those people into place to say what policy, and also putting them to task as well too, because they're easily accessible. Walk into your mayor's office. I'm not saying you can't just walk in, but I mean, at least where I live, the mayor is pretty visible on a daily basis. I see him walking through the city all the time, you know, pulling his ear to have a conversation to say, hey, here's what I don't like that's going on in my neighborhood. Here's how do I affect change on this? Here's what we need. So I do think that's one of the great things about a Trump presidency that came out, is people are more collectively conscious about the local lawmakers and how they affect their everyday lives.
Alex, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground as always. You started off by saying, has it always been this way? And I would say yes. I just think that the ability to access that in whether that's from a political organization or a corporate organization, the different things that we've talked about, was more limited in the past than it is today. And, the way I look at it is we had the old way of receiving our information. We've added the social media platforms, the multitude of those. They've like thrown it through this vortex and it spits it out. And now everybody not only has the ability to hear what they want to hear from a gazillion different sources, but they also have the ability to go and launch their own speaking points back out. And we've covered this before on some of these calls, but it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff and figure out, am I hearing it right? Is this right? Is it wrong? So it's no wonder, going back to the first topic, that corporations almost feel compelled now, like they need a voice to message, right or wrong. I mean, I'm not agreeing with any of it, but we're in this tweet society. So you get a CEO who lets out a tweet that everybody should vote one way or the other. Doesn't seem so unusual given everybody's tweeting, and most of the media, you could argue, isn't really telling you the story. They're giving you their opinion about the story. So you take that for news. I mean, you go across whether that's conservative channels or social, more left-leaning channels. It doesn't really matter. Everybody is less news broadcaster and more opinion broadcaster. So I think, it goes back to that confusion as to the blurring of the lines. And then I think I would argue that there is real, there are real issues at hand here. I think some of them are heightened to a level that we're all running around, got to get the vote out. So you're getting Hobby Lobby telling us to go vote. I'm sick and tired of getting these dings and pings from whatever outlets I got going on my phone telling me that I need to go out and vote, or don't forget to vote, or just a quick reminder, friendly reminder. If you haven't, here's a link. It's like coming at me every single day. And I think the last point that I wanted to make is your point about Trump. Look, good, bad, or indifferent, he like accelerated this heightened sense of whatever, because he's a polarizing guy. But it did bring to light a lot of these issues, as you mentioned, good or bad, they've come to light. And how we do that, go forward, and how we build the infrastructure is probably my biggest concern, because, again, I'm not really clear on, and I would assume others, how we do set the infrastructure when we're getting a disparate group of opinions and voices. It's drowning everything out from the ability to just kind of focus and get something done, I think, in many cases. And we've illustrated some of those things, going back to the comment about the tech industry back in the early, or late 90s, and not concerned about things, but all of a sudden they're front and center on things, to the scientists telling us that we need to vote against Trump for a better environment. So, those are just my 2 cents, a little bit random in thought, but they were points that we all covered. And that's, I guess I start where I ended. We have so much information. It's hard to determine.
Let's be honest. I'm actually looking forward to the webinar the next day after the election, because we may or may not have a president.
That's right.
And even if we do, nothing changes overnight. There has been so many things that I don't know if anyone has even had time to sit down and go, do we have a list of everything that has to be changed back?
There's a list.
Sorry?
There's a list.
Yeah. I have some things. Can I, we're going to talk offline. This is what happens when you have a good friend that has a line. But going back to someone saying you can walk into the mayor's office, and we've spoken about this before, something that I've always said I see others do. I don't see brown or black folks walking the halls of Congress, going into their congressman's office going, when I'm in there doing my loose layman's lobbying, I'll call it, Dwayne knows what I'm talking about. You see families coming in and out of offices and you see some people that they know Miss Mary, Because I don't know if Miss Mary lives in DC or not, but Miss Mary be up in the office. And Miss Mary has her list of things that's not right. Her stop sign, her trash can. And we need a little bit more Miss Marys of being invested of not only in our communities where we know we need to vote, as we just said, and pay attention to, but into our school systems and to our corporations and to what's really happening of where the money does go and doesn't go. It is time for us to take an invested interest in how this impacts our lives on a daily basis more than a news story or an article or in the year for which we vote. You know, someone said to me when I put out census is about diversity and inclusion, pretty much wanted to argue with me, and we all know I'm not going to do that arguing back and forth on social media, that the census is not diversity and inclusion. I said, the census is about community. And the lacking communities have been Black and brown folks across America, or those that are poor rural counties have not filled out the census. So yes, that is a diversity and inclusion issue, because if you don't fill it in and you don't understand why you don't have a hospital in your neighborhood or a post office or a trash can on your corner, it's because there wasn't enough people that qualified for a trash can. And this is 10 years in the making. And I think we don't gather the information and put it together as a whole in bit pieces that we'll vote over here, we won't do this one, that's important, that's not important. Where at the end of the day, I understand it's overwhelming, but each of it in its own respect is important for us to move, or you will have bosses telling you what you can and cannot do. Dwayne, would you like to wrap it and start closing it out?
You said a lot to unpack there, and so I'm going to just try to do rapid fire and unpack a bunch of it. With respect to, being involved with the process and, the lack of Black and brown folks, voices and faces, let me just say, first of all, me and my firm, we're unicorns in the business, right? Like, there aren't too many Black or brown owned firms that are lobbying, whether it's in New York or in DC in the first place. I think a lot of that has to do with, it's a cultural thing, right? Like our folks believe, they voted, they pay taxes, they put you in the office, you need to do what we put you in the office to do. And so there still isn't that muscle memory to say we need to get out and do more than just that, right? Like, there's a lot of work that needs to happen after election day that just doesn't happen. However, where I do see that work a lot is in New York City with the labor unions, right? The labor unions, when they need something, they turn out Black and brown folks, and they, you can't get into City Hall or around City Hall without, and in Albany as well. And so labor unions have been one of the driving forces to get Black and brown participation in the political process. I have argued with a lot of my younger millennial folks, and I'm not here to disrespect millennials, but they say they can't find the information. There's not enough information out there. And I said to them, you can tell me where you can get the newest pair of Yeezys, right? Where they are, where's some of them. You can find out who your local elected official is and what their platform is. Going back to what Micah said, every elected official is on social media at this point. And you can find out where they're going to be. They're tweeting. They're like, oh, we've got a free this giveaway or that giveaway. Get out there, and find out where they're going to be, whether it's during the week or on the weekend. Give them a piece of your mind. It's really, really easy to have a conversation with these folks because most of them are out in the community. And, so I think that is important. I'm going to leave some of the other stuff about the census alone because the census wrapped. But it is really just another way that some communities understand and get the importance of being counted, and others. And it's still, unfortunately, a cultural thing where it's just like, I'm not giving any more information than I have to give to try to get this stuff. You should know I'm here. What do you need to count me for?
Right. Well, we will leave it at that. I hope you will come back. I'm gonna put on your calendar now for the day after the elections. I know you're gonna be crazy busy.
I was about to say, you can't do that to me. I'm not gonna. The day after the election.
I know how that's going down, but I'm gonna stalk you as always. And I can't say pulling another favor because I'm always pulling in favors. I am grateful that you joined this evening. So insightful.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for everybody participating and listening to my gas. You know, I'm just a guy who gets paid to talk for a living, so I can do this all day. So,
no, I appreciate it, and as always, I thank all of you for joining, and we will have a lot to speak about on the next webinar /podcast. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and you'll join us again soon at Visibility Unlimited. Thank you.